Hello, my name's Roisin and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. Today we are going to be talking about books that feel like summer. I really love all things seasonal. I've made videos like this for cozy autumn books, books that feel like winter, springtime books as well. So I will leave all of them linked in the description and a link to the playlist in the cards above. If you would like some recommendations for books that aren't this season, if you are Australian or Kiwi or from South Africa and it actually is winter where you are now, then maybe that would be more appropriate for you. But today's video is just going to be all about books that just feel like summer. These books don't all link together. There's definitely not a very light beachy read, frothy summer feeling to these books, but I do think they all have a certain warmth to them, which is what makes them feel like summer to me. The first one I'm going to recommend is A Room with a View by E M Forster. This book is a classic that I often recommend because I think that it's a classic that's good for people who maybe don't read as many classics. It's definitely fairly accessible. I think late Victorian is potentially the most accessible classic period because its language is not so different from our own and they haven't started doing weird structuralist stuff yet, so it's fairly accessible, and I think that A Room with a View definitely is. It tells the story of Lucy Honeychurch, a young middle-class girl from the south of England who has gone on holiday to Tuscany with her cousin. It's about their experience in Italy and living in this pensione, which is kind of like a hotel, and they are moving in different classes, different places in life, because in the late Victorian period there was a breakdown of those class systems, a greater amount of travel going on, and so people were interacting in really new ways, which is something that E M Forster covers in his novel. Lucy Honeychurch has been quite a coddled person, and she is struggling with the strictures that society puts upon her and how that is different from how she feels herself and the things that she would want to do, and she's learning how to express herself. Forster uses travel to Italy and the famous passion of the Italians to be a part of this awakening of passion in Lucy Honeychurch, which happens through a romance but also through a growing discontent with the smallness of her society. The strictures of drawing room England, which really feel like a cage, so there's definitely a yearning for freedom. It feels like summer because it's a trip to Tuscany, which is obviously a beautiful holiday destination, and also because of the warmth of the relationships between these characters and some of the characters, including the Reverend and the two working class men that she meets in the pensione, a man and his son, and the way that they are more open and warm comparatively to the middle class cold and closeness in England. Another classic that I think is also really summery is Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn, Waugh. This is set in over two time periods in Britain. So we have the interwar period at Cambridge University, where Charles Ryder, a middle class boy, is going up to Cambridge to study, and there he meets Sebastian Flyte, who is the son of a very rich landed gentry Catholic family in Britain, and he is very clearly gay. And he has a sort of circle of men around him who are all from his same social class, but Charles feels drawn to him and also to the Ryder family. When he goes to their house, Brideshead becomes acquainted with Sebastian's sister and also with his mother, the matriarch of the family. But the novel begins in the 1940s when Brideshead has been requisitioned for the war effort and Charles Ryder is there as a captain in the army. It explores that point of the interwar period where the position of the British gentry was really changing quite rapidly, and it also explores ideas of religion and of identity, of love. Charles becomes entangled with both Sebastian and his sister, and we see what the future holds for Sebastian, who is to some extent protected by his wealth, but also by his religion, the coldness of his family, and the status of the time, what that effect that had on him as a gay man. There's really a lot of beautiful descriptions of punting down the rivers in Cambridge that feels very, very summery, and it's also quite witty and sharp and funny, which I think can make it feel like a summer novel, but at the same time there is a lot going on underneath. Moving away now from classics, another book that's set into university for the most part that I would recommend is Normal People by Sally Rooney. I think this one feels summery for me because it is a love story, although it is a love story that's more about two people's mental health and how their trauma and their culture and society impact on their ability to have a romantic relationship, and the things that constrict them. We get inside both Connell and Marianne, our main characters' heads, and we see how what they want, but how they are built in a way that kind of stops them from being able to get what they want. And gender and class in Ireland affects their relationship to status, because Connell is a working class but popular boy in school, and Marianne is a well-off but unpopular girl, and then when they go to university, their class statuses change the level of their popularity and of their ability to feel comfortable in their situation. It's a book with very beautiful writing where we move fluidly between the two perspectives, which allows us to see the way that they could connect if they would just allow themselves to. For me, it felt very honest, the way that I know a lot of people have complained that people don't really do that in real life. They don't avoid talking to each other about things in that, and it can be very easily solved with a conversation. But I think those people must just be very secure, because I know a lot of people who, for one reason or another, feel unable to talk that way, and self-sabotage is quite a common defense mechanism. So for me, it felt very realistic. Another love story, or in fact a collection of love stories, is Love in Colour by Bolu Babalola. These are short stories that are retellings of myths from around the world. There are a lot of West African myths used throughout this collection, as well as there are South Korean myth, an Arabic myth, some Greek myths, things like Scheherazade and Eros and Psyche, all of these different love stories from mythology, but that have been retold with a with more consent than some of the originals have, with more romance, with more personality. Bolu Babalola is definitely an excellent writer, and I think if you get a shorter attention span in summer, or maybe the fact that you are potentially doing more things than you have been, a collection of short stories that you can drop in and out of would be really good, I think. All of these books have women of colour at the centre of them, and they all explore love. Whilst I think it could have been a bit more diverse in terms of it's very, very straight focused, and lots of the characters have overlap, so they're quite similar. I think that if you were dipping into it, it would work really well as a summer read. Kind of a story that's about love, although in a very different, twisted way. That is My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. This tells the story of a woman whose sister is killing her boyfriends, and she is helping her clear up the bodies. It's kind of got a thriller aspect to it, which I know a lot of people like to read in the summer. There is the moment of trying to work out, because her sister's always claimed it's in self-defense, trying to work out what's actually the motive behind this, and then also when her sister becomes interested in the man in whom she is also interested, our main character is also interested, we see how her perspectives, her desires change. It talks to see how this has an effect on their relationship. It talks a lot about like gender in Nigeria, because it's set in Lagos, and it also has a lot of like sharp, quite wry commentary on gender and power dynamics and violence and male violence, and how the serial killer kind of flips this on its head. It's quite a light novel despite all of that darkness that I've talked about, and the relationships between the sisters is really the sort of relationship you would only have between siblings taken to an extreme, which I think works really well for kind of the heightened sort of surreal aspects of it. A piece of non-fiction that I think is great to read in the summer is Calypso by David Sedaris. Now, this is the only David Sedaris I have read, but I do think that his writing in general is probably good for summer reading, and he's definitely someone that I want to read more of. David Sedaris is a humorist and essay writer, and Calypso is one of his collections of essays. A lot of the stories revolve around his family and his beach house that him and his husband bought, that his family go and visit. There's a lot of like dry, biting, sarcastic humour that's really funny. He takes the piss out of absolutely everyone, including himself, and I really loved his essay about his Fitbit and his own addiction to it. He's kind of manages to be like both wry, biting, one-liner funny, and also have this sort of melancholy feeling that's undergirding everything, that is saying something about the human condition. He's definitely a very intelligent man, and I really enjoyed the humour. Again, as this is a collection of essays, if you have a shorter attention span in summer, then it's something that you could easily dip in and out of, and the humour and the warmth definitely make it feel summery to me. If you are struggling with an attention span and want something with humour and warmth, then I think Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones could be the perfect book as well. This is a middle grade or young YA novel, I guess, which is not something that I usually read, but I really fell for the charm of Howl's Moving Castle. There is a Studio Ghibli movie of this as well, which you may know, and so you may sort of know the story, but the film is quite a lot different than the book. It tells the story of Sophie Hatter, who lives in a hat shop, and when her father dies, her and her sisters, 3 of them, are split out, and Sophie has to stay at the shop. But one day, the Witch of the Waste curses her to become an old lady, and so she leaves the hat shop and goes to the moving castle where the wizard Howl lives. Howl is feared throughout her town because it is said that he eats young girls' hearts. Although we discover quite quickly that this is not true. Howl is a vain, silly, impetuous wizard, and also he is very, very Welsh. And there's lots of rugby songs and jokes about Wales, which I think is quite funny because that's not something at all you would know from the film. But he has a fire demon who lives in his fire, Calcifer, and Calcifer recruits Sophie to try and break the curse that he is under, but he cannot tell her anything about the curse, which is part of the curse. And we see kind of how they interact and all of the mini adventures, I guess, that they get up to over the course of Sophie trying to break the curse that is on her, and how she gets pulled into Howl's world and what he is trying to avoid or trying to save the country in which they live. It has so much warmth and heart. All of the characters are so brilliant, and it's so very, very funny. It has a wonderful romance in it that is not the heart of the book, but is still really wonderful. And it is a book that I read for the first time in April during a vlog where I read books that had inspired Studio Ghibli films, which I will leave in the cards above. And I have now read it 3 times in the past 3 months, so it's definitely stuck with me. Next book that I would like to recommend is The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abby Duray. This book is quite a lot darker than the other books that I have recommended so far, I think, but there is definitely warmth in it as well. It tells the story of Aduni, a young girl from Nigeria who is sold to be the 3rd wife of a man because her father needs the money, and she experiences trauma there, and when something terrible happens to one of the other wives, she has to flee and ends up being kind of sold again into domestic servitude. But Aduni is just striving for an education because before her mother died, that's what she said she needed. She needed to get an education so that she would get a louding voice. This book is hard going in a lot of ways. There is a lot of sexual violence, a lot of repeated gender-based violence, and also class-based violence that perpetuate throughout the novel. Duray really explores the different ways that sexism in Nigeria affects women differently, from the sexual violence of the women who are in servitude to the physical violence against women who cannot have children or who would not be taken seriously without a husband and so cannot leave him regardless of what happens to them. So there is a lot of darkness, but Aduni as a character is one of the most endearing and powerful characters. It is written in a way that I think is very, very accessible as well. So if you are more used to reading commercial or YA fiction, then this, I think, would work for you as a way into. It's kind of a gap bridger between more literary and more commercial works. And the final 2 books I would like to recommend do have a lot in common, surprising amount in common, and are both very chunky books. So if for you summer is a time when you can really explore and dive deep into books, then I think these would work. The first one is The Old Drift by Namwali Serpel, which tells the story of 100 years of Zambian history, although it does branch out from actual history at some point, I'm not entirely sure when, and becomes an alternate history instead, and even heads into the future. The Old Drift tells the story of 3 families who are bound together, the great-grandfathers of these family live together in a hotel called the Old Drift in Zambia when it was Northern Rhodesia in 1904, and then they split apart when they all go home, and they split apart and then come back again slowly towards each other. So you have 3 sections. You have the grandmothers, the mothers, and the children. One of these families is a white colonial family, one of these families is a black family from Zambia, and one of these families is Indian and Italian descent. and it explores ideas of race and class in Zambia and of colonialism in Zambia. It's a book that talks about politics, that talks about history, that talks about family and cycles. It is also a book that involves like science. There science fiction in the future, and it talks about like medical experimentation. It talks about things like technological colonialism. It talks about the HIV/AIDS crisis and medical experimentation. Yeah, there's a lot that goes on, but what I really loved about this book was how real and vivid the characters felt. They were really, again, warm, and there was so much, because it was written from multiple different perspectives, we'd see the characters inside their perspective and then from the way that other people saw them, which I always love in books, the way that you can see what one character was doing and then discover their motives later. And there are characters that you absolutely hate, and then you see from their perspective and you kind of understand where they're coming from more, which I think is a very interesting way to play with it, because no one is ever the villain in their own story. It's also kind of funny and witty. There's a lot of long discussions about politics and stuff, which is the way that Serpel uses to discuss ideas, and I think it's not one that I've heard a lot of people talking about, but it's really, really great, and I loved it. And I think that if you liked White Teeth by Zadie Smith, you would like this as well. And the final book that I'm going to recommend is White Teeth by Zadie Smith, which if you haven't read, I would really recommend you do. It's another chunky book that is great if you love an absorbing book in the summer, particularly if you are doing a staycation this year. White Teeth again tells the story of three families who are linked because the fathers from two of the families fought together in the war, and then the children of all three families go to the same school. We have a mixed race Jamaican mother and white father family. We have a Pakistani family, and we have a white English family, and it's again a story of race, of belonging, of Britishness, and it is very, very funny, and it also talks about religion and radicalization, and the radicalization that happens through religion that also happens through science. It's another book that has a lot of that follows history from the Second World War through the 1970s and then on into the millennium. I think it stops in the year 2000 if I remember rightly, and it talks again about science, about gene editing, about eugenics. There are a lot of really interesting ideas and things discussed in this book, but it is discussed through conversations that people are having. It feels very, very real to life, and the way I love books that meld religion and science, or talk about the meeting of religion and science, or the similarities between the way people act about religion and science, and so I think that it's really good, and also has a huge amount of humour. Both The Old Drift and White Teeth have a lot of humour, which I think makes it easier to kind of get through chunky books like that, and makes these serious topics feel lighter and more accessible, I suppose. Those are the 10 books that to me feel like summer. Let me know in the comments down below what kind of books you normally read in summer. I would love to hear from you. If you did enjoy this video, I will put another video here talking about summer books, if you would like some more recommendations or ideas, and I will leave a button here to subscribe. If you aren't subscribed already, I would love it if you would join us here. I put out new videos 3 times a week, every Wednesday, Friday and Sunday. So I will see you again very, very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye!